I never thought I'd be the guy posting here. I used to read stories on this subreddit and think, how do people not notice? How do you share a bed with someone and miss an entire second life happening beside you? Now I understand. My wife, Emily, was the kind of woman people envied me for marrying. She remembered my mom's birthday every year before I did. She packed my lunch when I had early shifts. She left sticky notes on the bathroom mirror that said things like, "Proud of you," or "Don't forget you real loved." She volunteered at the animal shelter, helped our elderly neighbor bring in groceries, and once drove 40 minutes in a storm because my sister's car battery died. I genuinely believed I had won the lottery. We'd been married 8 years. No kids, mostly because we kept saying next year while life stayed busy. I work in operations management, which means long hours, occasional travel, and too many late nights. Emily never complained. She'd kiss me, smile sadly, and say, "I married all of you, even the busy parts." That sentence hurts to remember now. 2 Saturdays ago, Emily asked me to come with her to a small charity event in another town about an hour away. She said one of her coworkers was organizing it and needed volunteers. Nothing unusual. Emily was always doing things like that. The event was at a community center. Kids running around, folding tables, cupcakes, donation boxes. Emily seemed nervous, but I assumed she was just tired. She kept checking her phone and scanning the room. At one point, she went to help set up raffle baskets, and I stood near the drinks table holding 2 paper cups of lemonade. That's when a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, came running toward me. She had dark curls, a sparkly purple backpack, and a missing front tooth. She stopped dead in front of me. Then she smiled and said, "Hi, Daddy Mark." I laughed awkwardly because I thought she had mistaken me for someone else. "I am not Mark, sweetheart," I said. Her smile disappeared. She looked confused, then scared. Before I could ask anything, Emily appeared out of nowhere. I mean out of nowhere. She grabbed the girl gently but firmly by the shoulders and said, "Ava, honey, go find Mrs. Holloway." The girl looked at Emily and whispered, but I thought Emily cut her off with this bright, fake laugh I had never heard before. Wrong person. Silly. No lie. Ava ran off. I turned to my wife and said, "Who is that?" Emily's face had gone pale, but only for a second. Then she smiled. Same warm smile. Same soft eyes. "Oh, that's Ava, one of the kids from the program. She gets attached to volunteers. She calls a lot of men daddy sometimes." And that's sad. And because I trusted her, I believed her. Mostly. That night, Emily was extra affectionate. She cooked my favorite pasta. She opened wine. She kept touching my arm like she was reassuring me, or maybe herself. But around midnight, I woke up and realized she wasn't in bed. I found her in the laundry room, whispering on the phone. I only heard one sentence before she noticed me. "Mark." She recognized him. Then she turned around, and the look on her face told me my life had just split in half. I barely slept after hearing my wife say those words. Mark. She recognized him. At first, I convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Mark was a coworker. Maybe Ava had mistaken me for someone else, and Emily was simply discussing the awkward situation. But deep down, something felt wrong. Not suspicious. Like seeing a familiar painting hanging slightly crooked and suddenly realizing you've never looked at it closely before. The second Emily saw me standing in the laundry room doorway, she ended the call. Immediately. "Who was Mark?" I asked. She smiled, not nervously, not guiltily, just calmly. "A volunteer coordinator." "Why were you whispering?" "I didn't want to wake you." "And what did you mean by she recognized him?" Emily hesitated, just for a second. Then she laughed. "You're really listening to half a conversation and creating a mystery movie, huh?" I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. She walked over, kissed my cheek, and wrapped her arms around my waist. "You're overthinking." That was always her superpower. She could make doubt feel embarrassing. By morning, I almost felt ridiculous. Almost. 3 days later, I was sitting at work when I got a notification from our credit card company. Normally, I ignored them. This one caught my attention because it showed a charge in a city 2 hours away. A city Emily had supposedly never visited. The charge was for a grocery store. $37. Not exactly evidence of anything. Still, I texted her. "Me, hey, random question. Were you ever in Cedar Falls recently?" 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, Emily, no. What? I sent the screenshot. 5 minutes later, she called. Not texted. Called. "That's weird," she said immediately. "Maybe fraud. Maybe. I'll call the bank." She sounded annoyed. Not worried. Annoyed. That bothered me. The bank later confirmed the physical card had been used. Not an online purchase. Not fraud. the actual card. Emily insisted they were mistaken. I let it go, or at least I pretended to. A week passed. Then something happened that I still replay in my head. Emily left her tablet on the kitchen counter while she showered. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't. A notification simply appeared on the screen. Miss you already. Ava keeps asking when you'll be back. My stomach dropped. The message disappeared before I could fully read it, but I had seen enough. When Emily came downstairs, I asked casually, "Who's Ava?" She froze, just for a fraction of a second. Then she smiled. "The little girl from the charity event. Why is someone texting you about her?" "Oh, the message." Emily looked at the tablet, then laughed. I bet that laugh, the one I had started noticing. Her grandmother volunteers with us. She misses you? People get attached. Everything sounded reasonable, every single answer, and yet something kept scratching at the back of my brain. That night after Emily fell asleep, I did something I'd never done in 8 years of marriage. I checked her phone. Nothing, no love that, no mark, no suspicious messages, no dating apps, no hidden photos, nothing. I actually felt guilty. Maybe I was becoming paranoid. Maybe I was destroying my marriage because of a child's mistake. Then I noticed something, a tiny detail, one I'd never paid attention to before. Our phone bill listed 3 devices, mine, Emily's, and another number, a number I didn't recognize, registered under Emily's name, a phone she had never told me existed. I stared at that screen until nearly sunrise. The next afternoon I left work early. I drove across town to the address connected to that number. It wasn't an office. It wasn't a store. It wasn't a charity organization. It was a small apartment building, and parked outside was my wife's car. The same car she had told me was currently sitting in her office parking lot. I sat there gripping the steering wheel for almost 20 minutes. Then I watched Emily walk out of the building. She wasn't alone. A tall man came out behind her. He put his hand gently on her shoulder, and Emily leaned into him like they'd done it 1,000 times. Then the little girl from the charity event ran out the door yelling "Mom," and for the first time in my life, I thought I was watching my wife with another family. I sat in my car and watched my entire marriage collapse in real time. The little girl wrapped her arms around Emily's waist. The man smiled at both of them, and Emily looked happy, not guilty, not stressed, of it, like she belonged there, like this was home. I don't remember driving away. I just remember pulling into a gas station parking lot 10 minutes later and throwing up. 8 years. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of anniversaries, Christmas mornings, road trips, late night conversations, inside jokes, and plans for the future. And apparently, none of it had been enough. That night Emily came home around 7. She kissed me, asked how my day was, complained about traffic. Then she sat beside me on the couch and showed me a video of a dog she thought was cute. I stared at her the entire time, trying to see the stranger, trying to understand how someone could lie that easily. Eventually she noticed. "What's wrong?" I almost told her. Almost. Instead I said I had a headache. She immediately brought me medicine, rubbed my shoulders, covered me with a blanket. The perfect wife. The same woman who had another family. The contradiction was driving me insane. For 3 days I pretended everything was normal. Then I started investigating. I hate that word, investigating. It makes me sound dramatic. But what else do you call it when your wife appears to be living 2 lives? The apartment building wasn't hard to find again. I took a personal day from work and parked across the street. Around noon Emily arrived. Around 20 minutes later the man showed up. They hugged, not like coworkers, not like friends. A real hug, and it's less comfortable, the kind that comes from years of familiarity. My chest felt like it was being crushed. I watched them go inside. 3 hours later they emerged with Ava. The 3 of them got into the man's SUV and drove away. I followed. The whole thing felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life. They stopped at a shopping center. The man pushed the cart. Emily walked beside him. Ava rode in the basket. At one point the little girl grabbed both their hands. They looked exactly like a family. Exactly. I sat in my car afterward and cried harder than I have since my father died. Because cheating is one thing, an affair is one thing, but this wasn't an affair. This looked like a life, a real life, a second marriage. That night I searched public records. I wanted information, anything. The man's name turned out to be Mark Harrison, 42 years old, project manager, no criminal history, no obvious connection to my wife. Then I found something strange. The apartment wasn't rented, it was owned. The mortgage was under a trust I had never heard of. The trustee, Emily, my wife, My wife owned the apartment, or at least part of it. The next discovery was even worse. I started reviewing our finances, every account, every statement, everything. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed recurring transfers, small amounts, $300 here, $500 there, never enough to attract attention, spread across years, thousands and thousands of dollars, money flowing into accounts I didn't recognize. I spent the entire weekend tracing transactions. By Sunday evening, I had identified one hidden savings account, then another, then another. The total balance made my hands shake. Almost $118,000. Money I never knew existed. Money she'd hidden while we discussed budgets and retirement plans. Money she'd apparently been using somewhere else. Monday night I confronted her. Not about everything, just the account. I wanted to see her reaction. "Emily," I said, placing a statement on the table. "What account is this?" The color drained from her face. For a second I thought I'd finally see the truth. Instead, she started crying. Instantly. Huge tears. Shaking shoulders. The whole thing. "I didn't tell you because I was embarrassed." "Embarrassed about what?" "It's for my mother." I knew her mother. Sweet woman. Retired. Financially stable. The story made no sense, but Emily cried so hard that I actually found myself comforting her. Comforting her. The woman I had watched with another man. Then she looked up at me and said something that completely destroyed my confidence. "You don't trust me anymore, do you?" And somehow, for a few minutes, I felt like the villain. Later that night, she fell asleep on the couch. I took her phone. Still nothing. No messages. No evidence. No mark. No lava. Nothing. Then I noticed something attached to the back of the phone. A magnetic card holder. One I'd never opened before. Inside was a key. A small brass key. And engraved on the side were 4 numbers. 3,178. The next morning I learned exactly what that key opened. And I immediately wished I hadn't. The key haunted me all night. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily standing beside Mark and Ava, smiling like they belonged together. Then I'd remember the hidden accounts, the apartment, the lies, and that tiny brass key. The next morning, Emily left for what she claimed was a training seminar. The moment she drove away, I called in sick. I had already searched the number engraved on the key, 3,178. It matched a storage facility on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, the same city where I'd found the apartment, the same city where Mark and Ava lived. By noon, I was standing in front of Unit 3,178. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the key. Part of me still hoped there would be an innocent explanation. Maybe old furniture, family keepsakes, business records, anything. I unlocked the door. The roll-up metal door rattled upward, and my entire world changed. The unit wasn't filled with junk. It wasn't storage. It was alive. Shelves lined the walls, boxes carefully labeled, photo albums, school supplies, Christmas decorations, children's toys, family keepsakes. Everything organized with obsessive care, like someone visited regularly, like someone loved the contents. The first thing I picked up was a framed photograph. Emily, Mark, Ada, standing in front of a Christmas tree. The date printed in the corner was 6 years old. Yes, my knees almost gave out. I found dozens more. Birthdays, Halloween costumes, beach trips, school events, family dinners. In every single picture, Emily was there. Always smiling, always involved, always looking like a mother. I felt physically sick. Then I found the binders. 3 thick binders labeled medical, school, financial. The financial binder was the worst. Mortgage statements, insurance payments, utility bills, bank records, everything connected to the apartment, everything funded partially by Emily. For years, nearly a decade, she wasn't helping occasionally. She was maintaining an entire household. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars, possibly more. I kept digging. Then I found something that didn't make sense. A birth certificate, not Ada's, someone else's. A teenage girl's name, Megan. Born 16 years ago. Mother listed, Emily. Father, blank. I stared at the document. Read it 3 times. Thor. My wife had a child she had never mentioned, not once in 8 years. I searched further. More records, medical reports, old school enrollment forms, photos, hundreds of photos. A little girl growing up, Emily holding her, Emily reading to her, Emily celebrating birthdays, years and years of memories, all hidden. My wife had a daughter she'd concealed from me our entire relationship. At first I assumed Megan must be Ava. Maybe she'd changed names somehow. Then I found recent photos. Both girls were in them. 2 different children. My head started spinning. Who are these people? Who had I married? Then I found a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front. Not my full name. Just for Daniel. If he ever finds this, I nearly dropped it. My name. My actual name. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. Dated 3 years earlier. I unfolded it. The first sentence hit me like a truck. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means Emily finally got caught. I stopped breathing. The letter wasn't from Emily. It was from Mark, the man I believed was having an affair with my wife. The man I thought was stealing her from me. The man I hated. And according to the letter, he already knew who I was. He had known for years. What I read next completely shattered everything I thought I understood. Because Mark wasn't warning me about an affair. Mark believed I was the other man. And according to him, Emily had spent years convincing him that he was her husband. I read Mark's letter 3 times before my brain accepted the words. Then I read it a 4th time, and a 5th, because it made absolutely no sense. According to the letter, Mark believed he and Emily had been in a committed relationship for nearly 10 years. He believed they were building a future together. He believed the apartment was temporary. He believed there were legal complications preventing marriage. He believed 100 different explanations Emily had fed him over the years. And somehow, unbelievably, he had never learned about me, just like I had never learned about him. The letter was short, only a few pages, but every sentence made me feel sicker. One section was highlighted. If you're reading this, she probably told you I was dangerous, unstable, obsessed, or abusive. She told me the same things about you. I sat on the floor of that storage unit for almost an hour, trying to understand how this could be real. Eventually, I found Mark's phone number at the bottom. My hands shook as I typed it into my phone. I didn't call immediately. I drove home first. I needed time. I needed to think. When I arrived, Emily was already there. She greeted me with a kiss, a smile, a question about dinner, and for the first time, I felt something break inside me, because all I could see now was the scale of the deception. Not one lie, thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Every morning, every evening, every anniversary, every birthday, every conversation, a carefully maintained illusion. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Mark. He answered on the 3rd ring. Allah? For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "My name is Daniel." Silence. Complete silence. Then I heard him sit down. I always wondered if you'd call. I don't know what response I expected. Anger, defensiveness, threats. Instead, he sounded exhausted, like a man carrying a burden for years. We talked for nearly 3 hours. 3 hours that changed everything. Mark told me his version of Emily, and it sounded eerily familiar. The birthday surprises, the thoughtful gifts, the handwritten notes, the emotional speeches about loyalty, the way she remembered every detail, the way she could make you feel like the most important person in the world. It was the same woman, exactly the same. She had essentially duplicated entire sections of her personality across 2 relationships. Then came the first truly massive revelation. Ava wasn't Mark's daughter. I actually laughed when he said it. Not because it was funny, because my brain couldn't process another twist. What do you mean she's not yours? Mark sighed. Ava is Emily's niece. Oh, her sister died years ago. I nearly dropped the phone. The little girl I had convinced myself was proof of an affair wasn't his child at all. Emily had apparently taken responsibility for helping raise her. At least that part was true. But then came the next revelation, the one that nearly stopped my heart. What about Megan? I asked. The line went quiet. How do you know about Megan? I found records. Another long silence. Then Mark said, Megan is Emily's daughter. I already knew that part. What I didn't know was the rest. She had Megan before either of us met her. My stomach dropped. Where is she now? College. I couldn't speak. My wife had hidden an entire daughter from me. Not a baby who had died. Not a child she lost custody of. A living daughter. A daughter currently attending college. A daughter she'd visited regularly for years, without ever telling me she existed. Then Mark said something that made everything even worse. Megan thinks I'm her stepfather. I closed my eyes, because suddenly I understood. Emily hadn't just lied to 2 men. She'd built an entire alternate reality. Different people, different stories, different histories. Everyone receiving a customized version of the truth. Then Mark asked a question that chilled me. Daniel, did she ever tell you about her business trips? I immediately thought of the dozens she'd taken over the years. Conferences, training sessions, corporate retreats. All perfectly ordinary, all documented, all believable. Yeah, I said. Mark let out a bitter laugh. That's what she told me when she visited you. The room started spinning, because if Mark was right, every single business trip for nearly a decade had been a lie, and we had only scratched the surface. Then he told me there was one thing he hadn't included in the letter. Something so serious he'd been afraid to write it down. something involving forged documents. And apparently, Emily's entire family knew about it. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? For weeks, every answer had created 5 new questions. But this was different. Until now, I'd been imagining a woman trapped inside a web of lies she'd built herself. Now, I was learning that other people had helped. Other people had looked me in the eye and lied. That realization hurt more than I expected, because I knew Emily's family. Or at least I thought I did. Her mother had spent Christmas at our house. Her brother had borrowed my truck. Her aunt sent us anniversary cards. These weren't strangers. These were people who had eaten at my table. People who had toasted our marriage. People who apparently knew it wasn't real. The next morning, Mark and I met in person. For the first time, I expected it to be awkward, maybe hostile. Instead, it felt strangely familiar. We were both exhausted, both angry, both trying to understand how we'd become characters in the same nightmare. We met at a diner halfway between our cities. The first thing we did was compare photographs. Years of photographs. And that's when the timeline became impossible to ignore. While I thought Emily was attending conferences, she was with Mark. While Mark thought she was on work trips, she was with me. Birthdays, holidays, weekends, vacations. Every year had been split in half, like a custody arrangement, except neither of us knew we were sharing her. At one point, Mark slid a photograph across the table. My stomach dropped. It showed Emily standing beside a cabin I recognized instantly. It was where she claimed she'd attended a corporate leadership retreat 6 years earlier. Except in this photo, she was holding Mark's hand. The timestamp matched the exact week she'd supposedly been away for work. One of my favorite memories suddenly turned toxic because I remembered picking her up from the airport afterward. I remembered buying flowers. I remembered how excited she was to see me. I remembered thinking how lucky I was. All of it had been theater. The memory physically hurt. Mark understood immediately because he had the same expression. He'd experienced the same thing dozens of times. Then he handed me a folder. Inside were copies of documents, mortgage paperwork, insurance forms, tax records, and there it was, the forged signature. Mine, or something very close to mine. I stared at it. That's not my signature. I know. Emily had apparently created documents claiming I had agreed to certain financial arrangements involving the apartment. Some were years old. Some listed me as a relative. Others described me as a business partner. The lies weren't just personal anymore. They were legal, potentially criminal. Then came the bombshell. Mark pulled out a photograph. An old family gathering. Emily, her mother, her brother, her aunt, Megan, Mark, everyone smiling together. A normal family photo. Until he pointed to the date. 7 years ago. The exact same weekend I was attending Emily's cousin's wedding. A wedding her entire family claimed to attend. Except apparently half of them had been somewhere else. With Mark, living a completely different version of reality. I felt sick. Her family wasn't covering for occasional lies. They were actively participating, maintaining schedules, providing alibis, helping coordinate stories. 4 years. Then Mark revealed something even worse. The apartment wasn't the only property. There was another house. A small house outside Cedar Falls. Emily had contributed money toward it. Not directly. Through hidden accounts. Through trusts. Through shell arrangements. That explained the missing money. The secret savings. The transfers. The hidden accounts. But it also raised a terrifying question. Why would someone need that much hidden property? What exactly was she preparing for? The answer came later that evening. I finally confronted Emily about Megan. Not everything, just Megan. I wanted the truth from her mouth. The moment I said the name, her face turned white. She sat down, started crying. Real tears, the kind that make you briefly forget everything. For a moment, I actually felt sorry for her. Then she told me a heartbreaking story about being a teenage mother. About shame, fear, family pressure, loss, and for about 10 minutes I believed her. Then she accidentally mentioned visiting Megan during a trip she'd supposedly spent with me. A trip I remembered vividly. A trip where we'd celebrated our anniversary. The dates couldn't possibly match. Emily realized her mistake immediately. The crying stopped. The excuses started. And for the first time since this began, I watched her lie in real time. Not gracefully. Not convincingly. Desperately. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and I saw a contact name I'd never seen before. James. Neither Mark nor I were named James. And suddenly it became clear that we weren't the only ones. The moment I saw the name, everything stopped. James, not Mark, not me, someone else, a third man. For a second, neither of us moved. Emily stared at the screen. I stared at her. The phone kept ringing, then it stopped. A few seconds later a text appeared. Miss you already. The same kind of message I'd seen before. The same kind of message Mark had received. The same kind of message I'd received hundreds of times over the years. Except now it was being sent to someone else. Emily immediately flipped the phone face down. Too late. I'd already seen it. What was that? I asked. No one has a heart next to their name. She started crying. Immediately, as if someone had pressed a button. The tears appeared so quickly that it almost felt rehearsed. Maybe it was. By then I didn't know what was genuine anymore. You've been distant for years, Daniel. There it was. The blame. The first thing she'd done every time she'd been cornered. Shift responsibility. Create confusion. Make herself the victim. You work constantly. You travel. You never noticed how lonely I was. I just stared at her. Because a month earlier those words might have worked. A month earlier I would have apologized. Now I knew better. You had two families. He flinched. You don't understand. You forged documents. More tears. My childhood was complicated. You lied about Megan. My mother pressured me. You stole money. I was trying to survive. Every answer became another excuse. Every excuse became another accusation. By the end of the conversation, she somehow had herself convinced that I was partially responsible, not for her choices, but for making them necessary. It was one of the most disturbing things I've ever witnessed. The complete inability to accept responsibility. Eventually, she locked herself in the bedroom. I called Mark. When I told him about James, the line went silent. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny, because we'd crossed into insanity. At that point, nothing seemed impossible anymore. The next morning, we started digging together. It's strange how quickly hatred can disappear when you realize someone else suffered exactly what you did. Mark wasn't my enemy. He never had been. He was another victim. I knew we'd found references to James. A lot of references. Different accounts. Different records. Different messages. Apparently, Emily had become less careful recently. Or maybe maintaining multiple lives was becoming harder. Then we found social media. A profile. Private, but not private enough. And there he was. James Carter, 36. Recently divorced. Lived almost 4 hours away. Different city. Different state. Different life. The photographs made my stomach drop. Because Emily was in them. Not tagged, not identified, but clearly visible. Standing beside him. At restaurants, parks, community events. Always just slightly in the background. Like someone trying not to be noticed. Then Mark found something worse. A photograph from 6 months earlier. James, Emily, and a little boy, maybe 4 years old. The caption read, "Family Weekend." I felt cold all over. We stared at the screen. Neither of us spoke, because we both arrived at the same conclusion simultaneously. Emily wasn't just maintaining two lives. She was building another one. Then we found the real bombshell. James had recently purchased a house. A beautiful suburban home. The mortgage records were public. The down payment was substantial. Very substantial. And part of it had originated from one of the hidden accounts we'd already identified. Our money. The money she'd hidden. The money she'd moved for years. It was helping fund another life, another future, another family. Then Mark uncovered something that genuinely frightened me. A series of emails, not between Emily and James, between Emily and her brother. One sentence stood out immediately. Everything should be ready before Daniel and Mark figure it out. I read it 3 times, then a 4th, because the wording mattered. Before Daniel and Mark figure it out. Knife, before, meaning they already knew the deception was unraveling, meaning they'd been planning for the collapse, meaning James wasn't an accident. He was the next phase, the replacement, the future, the backup plan. And if that wasn't horrifying enough, the next email contained a scanned document, a legal document, one bearing my forged signature, one bearing Mark's forged signature, and one naming a beneficiary neither of us had ever heard of. A child who wasn't Ava, wasn't Megan, and definitely wasn't anyone either of us knew existed. I wish I could say there was a point where the lies stopped shocking me. There wasn't. Every time I thought we'd reached the bottom, we found another trapdoor. The document Mark had uncovered listed a beneficiary named Lily Harper. Neither of us recognized the name. At first I assumed it was another fake identity, another shell account, another layer of financial deception. But the more we dug, the worse it became. Lily was real, very real, 7 years old. Same age as Ava, living in a city nearly 5 hours away, and somehow connected to Emily. I remember staring at the records while Mark sat across from me in complete silence. Neither of us wanted to say what we were thinking, because the obvious possibility was horrifying. Another child, another family, another life. We spent 2 days trying to verify information. The trail was complicated. Trusts, custodial accounts, private school payments, medical insurance contributions, thousands of dollars moving through channels specifically designed to hide their origin. Whoever set this up had put serious effort into it. Then we found the first photograph. I still remember the feeling, the numbness, the complete disbelief. The photo showed a little girl at a birthday party, big cake, balloons, friends, and standing in the background Emily, not accidentally, not passing through, participating, smiling, holding presents, looking exactly like she'd looked with Ava, exactly like she looked with Megan, exactly like she'd looked with me. For years I'd thought there were two versions of my wife. Now it felt like there were 20. That evening Mark and I met again. We developed an odd friendship by then, not because we had much in common, because trauma creates strange bonds. Nobody else understood. Nobody else could. At one point he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. You know what hurts the most? I thought he'd say the cheating, the money, the lies. Instead he said, I miss the woman who never existed. That sentence broke something inside me, because I understood perfectly. I missed her too. The woman who left notes in my lunch. The woman who remembered every birthday. The woman who stayed up with me when my father died. The woman who cried when we exchanged wedding vows. The woman who told me I was her best friend. The problem was that every memory now had a shadow attached to it. Every beautiful moment came with a question. Where had she been the day before? Who had she called afterward? Who else had heard the same words? Then came the revelation that finally destroyed any remaining sympathy I had for Emily. Up until then, a tiny part of me still wondered if she was mentally unwell, if she was trapped, if childhood trauma had somehow spiraled into something catastrophic. Then we found the recordings, dozens of them, voice memos stored in a cloud account, private reflections she'd apparently made over the years. We listened to one, then another, then another. In one recording she talked about balancing schedules. In another she discussed finances. In another she laughed about keeping stories straight. Actually laughed. There was no confusion, no breakdown, no loss of control. Everything was intentional, calculated, planned. Then we found a recording dated 8 months earlier, a recording that made my blood run cold. Emily was speaking to her brother. They were discussing James, discussing timelines, discussing finances. And then Emily said, once James settles into the house, everything will be easier. Her brother asked, what about Daniel and Mark? Emily answered immediately, without hesitation, without guilt, without emotion. They'll survive. They always do. I wanted to throw up, because in that moment I finally understood. We weren't husbands. We weren't partners. We weren't even people to her anymore. We were assets, resources, sources of stability, pieces on a board. Then the recording ended with one final sentence. A sentence neither of us understood at the time. I just need another year before the Arizona move. Arizona. Neither of us lived in Arizona. Neither did James. But before long, we'd learn exactly what she meant. And it would turn out to be the biggest secret of all. The words haunted me. I just need another year before the Arizona move. For 2 days, Mark and I tried to figure out what that meant. At first we assumed it was related to James. Maybe he was relocating. Maybe Emily planned to move there with him. Maybe it was another hidden property, another secret account, another lie. By then we were conditioned to expect the worst. The reality was somehow worse. We started by searching property records. Nothing. Then business registrations. Nothing. Then travel records, hotel receipts, and financial transactions connected to the hidden accounts. That's when Arizona finally appeared. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. Hotel reservations, rental car payments, utility deposits, storage fees, mail forwarding services. Every trail pointed toward the same city, a suburb outside of Phoenix. The pattern stretched back almost 3 years. 3 years. Emily hadn't just been planning an escape. She'd been building one. Carefully, methodically, patiently. Then Mark found a lease agreement, a current lease, signed 8 months earlier. The tenant name wasn't Emily. It wasn't James. It wasn't me. It wasn't Mark. The tenant was listed as Emily Harper, not Emily's actual surname, a completely different identity. At first I thought it was fraud. Then we found supporting documents, bank accounts, utility bills, insurance paperwork, everything under the same false identity. Emily had literally created another version of herself, a legal-looking paper trail extending years into the past. Enough documentation to convince almost anyone. Enough documentation to start over somewhere new. Enough documentation to disappear. That night, I finally stopped asking why, because there wasn't going to be a satisfying answer. There was only the reality of what she'd done. The next morning, something unexpected happened. James contacted us. Apparently, Emily's carelessness had finally caught up with her. He had discovered discrepancies, missing weekends, Contradictory stories, financial irregularities, the same breadcrumbs that had led us here. I still remember our first video call. The poor guy looked exactly how Mark and I had looked weeks earlier. Confused, terrified, heartbroken. He genuinely believed he was in a serious long-term relationship with Emily. He believed they were planning a future together. He believed the house they'd purchased was the beginning of their life together. Then Mark quietly asked, "Did she tell you she loved you?" James actually laughed. Every day, none of us spoke for a few seconds, because we'd all heard those same words thousands of times. Eventually we compared timelines, compared photographs, compared messages. The overlap was staggering. Emily had somehow maintained 3 separate romantic lives simultaneously. Not casual relationships, not occasional affairs. Entire lives, entire futures, entire emotional worlds. Then James showed us something none of us had seen before. A screenshot. A conversation with Emily from 4 months earlier. At first it looked ordinary. Then I saw one message, one sentence, one line that made my stomach turn. "Once Arizona is ready, we can finally be together without complications." James had assumed she meant her divorce from some ex-boyfriend. He never knew about us. Neither had we. But the next message was even worse. "I've learned from the mistakes with the others." The others, plural. Not Mark, not Daniel. The others, as if we were previous projects, previous experiments, disposable. Then James revealed the final piece. Emily had recently asked him to co-sign paperwork. Large amounts of paperwork. Trusts, insurance policies, future planning documents, including one document naming beneficiaries. Several beneficiaries. Most of the names were unfamiliar, but one wasn't. The last name on the list belonged to a man living in Arizona. A man we'd never heard of before. A man Emily had been calling almost every week. A man whose messages included hearts, vacation photos, future plans, and phrases like, "Can't wait until we're finally together." There wasn't going to be a fourth family. There already was one beginning. And for the first time, all 3 of us realized something terrifying. Emily hadn't been reacting to getting caught. She had been preparing to leave us behind, and she had already chosen who came next. None of us were looking for answers anymore. We were looking for the exit. The truth had become too big, too ugly, too exhausting. I used to think betrayal happened in a single moment. A guess, an affair, a lie. What I learned is that some betrayals happen thousands of times. One decision after another, one lie stacked on top of another until an entire life is built from them. At that point there were 3 of us. Mark, James. 3 men who had spent years believing they were loved. 3 men who had built futures around the same woman. 3 men who eventually discovered we were all living inside different versions of the same story. And surprisingly, we weren't angry at each other. Not anymore. We were angry at the person who had put us there. The final confrontation happened 2 weeks later. Not because we planned it, because Emily ran out of room. The financial investigations had expanded. Lawyers were involved. The forged signatures had become impossible to ignore. Family members were suddenly refusing phone calls. People who had spent years helping her maintain the deception were distancing themselves. The entire structure was collapsing. Eventually, Emily agreed to meet. One meeting, one room, one final conversation. She arrived looking exhausted. Older, smaller somehow. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't appear in control. She sat across from us and cried. Adam. The tears came immediately. The apologies followed. Then the explanations. Loneliness, childhood trauma, fear of abandonment, family pressure, mental health struggles. She spoke for nearly an hour. At one point I almost felt sympathy, because some of what she described sounded genuinely painful. A chaotic childhood, an unstable home, years of insecurity. For a few minutes I saw the broken person underneath everything. Then Mark asked a simple question. Why did you stop? Silence. A long silence. Then she answered, and I'll never forget it. Because every time I thought I'd lose one of you, I found another reason not to. Not guilt, not remorse, not accountability. Convenience. And that was the answer. Convenience. We weren't people she couldn't bear to hurt. We were things she couldn't bear to lose. The room went quiet. Even Emily seemed to realize what she'd just admitted. Then James asked about Arizona. Her face changed instantly. That tiny reaction told us everything. Eventually she confessed. Not everything. Probably not even half. But enough. The Arizona identity was real. The property was real. The man there was real. The plans were real. She had intended to relocate within the next year. Slowly, carefully, just like she'd done before. The house James helped find would have become another stepping stone. the Arizona property would have become the next chapter, the next life, the next version of Emily, the next family, maybe not the fourth, just the fourth that we knew about. That realization hit harder than anything else, because suddenly, I understood something. There was probably no finish line, no final lie, no final victim. If she hadn't been caught, she'd have kept going. Yes, decades, maybe forever. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. It wasn't dramatic, no screaming, no revenge, just paperwork, signatures, silence, the end of a marriage that now felt impossible to define. Mark and I stayed in touch. Unexpectedly, James did too. Every few months one of us sends a message, checks in, share updates. Life moved forward, slowly, handily. It moved. Last month we met for dinner, 3 former strangers connected by the strangest experience of our lives. At one point Mark raised a glass and laughed. Imagine explaining this story to normal people. We all laughed, because what else could we do? Then he said something that stuck with me. We weren't stupid, and he was right. That's the part I want people reading this to understand. We weren't fools. Emily wasn't successful because we were naive. She was successful because she was extraordinarily skilled at making people feel loved. That's what made it work. That's what made it hurt. The hardest part wasn't losing her. It was realizing that my favorite memories still existed. The road trips, the anniversaries, the nights we stayed awake talking until sunrise, the moments I felt happiest. Those memories were real. The feelings were real. I experienced them, even if the person beside me wasn't who I believed she was. The last thing I ever learned about Emily came from an investigator involved in the financial case. Apparently, shortly before everything collapsed, she'd been communicating with multiple people online under different identities, starting new conversations, building new relationships, telling new stories, laying new foundations, preparing new beginnings, even as the old ones were falling apart. When I heard that, I wasn't angry anymore, just tired, because after everything, the final revelation wasn't that Emily had been preparing a third family. It was that she had already started building the next one. And if a little girl hadn't accidentally called me the wrong name that day, I probably never would have known. This is the end of the story. Don't forget to share with your friends, comment, like, and subscribe.